all right. Welcome. Today's a special day. We got a special guest
Very
on the
special.
podcast, and it's Rocco on deck to come and bring through all the little tidbits in the remake coming up. We're going to talk about a lot of things that were in the Dead Space original game, which is by far probably the scariest game I've ever
Just woke
played.
up in here and everybody was gone. I don't know what's happening. Why did they all leave? I'm going to try and find someone. If you can hear this, please come for me. I can hear scratching in the wall.
I don't think I've played a scarier game than that.
Definitely one of them.
A lot of people could say, the Resident Evil games, the original
That's what I was gonna say. Resident Evil 2.
scary. The atmosphere obviously is one of the inspirations.
Yeah.
And Resident Evil is one of the inspirations for the Dead Space game. But yo, Rocco, say hi to everybody.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great. I'm really excited to be here. Dead Space is definitely a fun game to talk about. It's one of those games that, I've been really excited about the remake coming out, and I'm really curious to see what EA is going to have to do with this new remake, because it's such a great game that we used to play back then, and hopefully with all the new things that they can put into it, it could be just as great to experience it again. So thanks for having me on here, guys.
No doubt, man.
Yeah, absolutely,
No doubt.
absolutely. We're very happy to have you. This game series is something that I've played like an obsessive amount. I remember, I shit you not, I've probably replayed Dead Space 1 and 2, like at least Dead Space 2, I've probably replayed that game like legitimately almost 10 times. Like I would like restart New Game Plus that just on repeat. I just, I don't know why. Ever since like I remember the first time I experienced Dead Space, I was sitting in my friend John's basement when I put on a set of Turtle Beach headphones and played like the Dead Space 2 demo, and like I remember it like scaring the shit out of me, but like I was instantly like addicted.
Was that the first level of the game?
No, it was when you're in the Unitologist church and the giant motherfucking like necromorph like creature thing comes and like attacks
that's
you
right.
in the church. That was the demo, and I remember being like, oh my god, this is like amazing. Then I went back and
I
played
never
the
got to
first
play the
one.
demo. That must have been crazy. Knowing that game was coming out and, playing the original and then the second one you're playing the demo, just to like see everything that they've changed and all that. That's the excitement, I guess, that's behind this remake, is because there's going to be a genuine aura around it, right? They have a lot of the original team coming back to make it. They obviously, on that little demo that they showed, I believe it was about 9 months back or 8 months back. I'm not sure, but it was a while ago.
It was over the summer. I
Yeah,
believe.
it was nice.
They pretty much went through and showed a really raw form of the game, but it was super impressive because of how raw it was. This was like pre-alpha footage, and they were already showing parts of the engine that had, ray tracing, different lighting for the environment.
And it still looks good. I mean, the Frostbite engine is like really powerful, so like it looked good regardless. Like, imagine what it's going to look like when it comes out finally.
Oh, absolutely. And having an environment like that, I feel like it'll throw you more into the, make it more immersive. When you're playing the game back on the 360, right? This is what, 12, 14 years ago when Dead Space first came out. Yeah, 2008.
A while, man.
It was a while, and it was still creepy. It was, a dark screen, things jumped out at you, and it was like, the jump scares, the loud bangs and all these other different monsters coming at you. Now, like, things are becoming a lot more realistic looking. Things are becoming smoother, like now we're out of that 60 frames now. Like, we can get 120, 144. OLEDs now will make your entire room completely dark, and things that'll jump out at you will just be even brighter and scarier. Now we have fog on the ground, right? And ray tracing with these lights and these shadows, and I just can't imagine the amount of the potential that they have for this remake. I just hope it's not a remaster, and I want I want them to take the time and redo these animations, make it all part of this new engine, and really make it a cinematic experience, just like it was.
It's a complete ground up remake, just like in the same vein as like the Resident Evil 2 remake from a few years ago. Because I find that funny because actually Dead Space, the like original like Dead Space game was actually heavily influenced by like the that third person over the shoulder style horror game, just like Resident Evil 4 when it was so popular. It was a huge influence on Dead Space actually, even though one is set in space, but like I just find it funny. Yeah, exactly. So it kind of like, I feel like it's funny. It kind of goes full circle, taking its cue with the remake. The ground up type remake also with the from Resident Evil. It's interesting.
Yeah, honestly, everyone knows that Glenn Schofield and his team. Who was the other gentleman that was on that? That was one of the main producers for that.
Was it Michael Condrey? Michael Condrey.
Yes.
He was the director.
So they spoke a lot in that little demo. Actually, no, I'm speaking on the interview now that happened when the first Dead Space actually came out, there was an interview that they ran with Glenn Schofield, where he would, discuss a lot of the elements that went into making the environments and making the atmosphere. And one of them just happened to be that they were under a bridge somewhere, and a train was passing overhead, and the sound of the train passing overhead was just so barbaric and so unsettling that they decided to then come back with a recording crew, record the noise of the train running overhead, and then place that in the game. It would happen whenever you were going from, into a zero-G environment, and the air traps would go and they would suck all the air out. Or if you would be running through like an area, they would just play the audio, and automatically everyone would just be running. Playing that game and the audio came on, you don't have any other choice. You're like, what the fuck, yo? Like, what's coming after me, bro? I gotta run. I gotta get through this shit right now.
Panic sets in.
It's amazing to see how they not only took inspiration from those Resident Evil games, but then they evolved on it, right?
Yeah, and one thing I also want to. Oh yeah, one thing I also want to say is too is like even like I think one of the best things that Dead Space had going for it was its sound design. Like you were just talking about like with the lengths they went to recording certain sounds, but like even like without like I feel like it's the kind of game where like it wasn't even necessarily the graphics or like the jump scares that really got you. It was like it was putting on the headphones and like the sound design. Like you didn't even like need the visuals, you know what I mean? So like it's only going to be so much more enhanced. Like I can't imagine how much like the dismemberment in the remake I imagine is going to be like
their limbs.
exceptional.
Cut off their limbs. Yo, when I first saw that scribbled on the wall in blood, I was like, okay, that's fine, but am I gonna actually have to do that? So I'm going through the game, and then you start grabbing a plasma cutter, and you start cutting their limbs off. Like, yo, this is crazy. And they're coming at you, flailing their arms everywhere. But they really created a great system where, depending on where you hit them, I think they had 3 different points of dismemberment on each limb. They had, right at the hip, the knee, and then, if you can get between there,
the shoulders.
You're really cut off just near the ankle. Yeah. But it was just amazing, the things that they were able to do on that hardware of that generation.
I remember
that's what really drives a lot of the excitement, because we're on Xbox Series X, and we're on PS5, and obviously PC is just on another level, on another stratosphere when it comes to that, and DLSS and all of the performance advantages that has. You're telling me you're gonna remake that game from the ground up today? You've got to be kidding me. Let alone a VR experience. I mean, if EA really doubles down and they really want to gain the confidence back of all the gamers and all the trauma that they put us through with Star Wars Battlefront, all the disservice they've done to Need for Speed, because that game should be in another level. It shouldn't even be under Forza Horizon. Need for Speed has the potential to be a game that is better than a Horizon type game, because you've got the atmosphere and the feel of being underground and being
and nostalgia too.
Racing. Yeah, very nostalgic, right? So, they've been working their way in terms of the recovery from Star Wars Battlefront 2. Obviously, when it first came out, horrific entry into the market. People hated it. And obviously, as the years have gone on, the consensus has been, hey, look, they at least worked on it, and it became a much better experience down the road. But in order for them to really gain the confidence back from these gamers, they need to execute on this remake 100% and need to allow Motiv to do their thing and not interfere in any way with any microtransactions, not interfere in any way with anything that could be cosmetic that's added. Let everything be in the game.
You're forgetting. You're talking about Electronic Arts, You're talking about EA, microtransaction out the wazoo. EA, I don't care how bad the servers are, you're still going to pay me. EA, we're going to give you something that has so many bugs, but we did not plan to fix it as soon, and we're still going to release it for $60. EA. Now, don't get me wrong. EA has a huge portfolio. They have a lot of things to worry about and a lot of things to upkeep, right? The more things that you start carrying around, the more things you have to worry about, the more resources that you have to start splitting up. Understandably so. when Corona came in and everybody starts working from home, and now we have all these different plans that they started to stick to, you obviously started to see throughout the entire gaming industry that all these game developers and not just EA really suffered, really suffered. But
Yeah.
I'm waiting for EA to make the right decisions and to push their games out. And you saw what Battlefield 2042 really had, you know?
Exactly.
That was towards the end of the pandemic. They saw what happened to
bed
Call of Duty.
hard.
They saw what happened to all these other games that released, and they really weren't finished products. And they know how the consumer was reacting, and they still went ahead and released this thing.
I know.
Enough where
Speak on what they've done
Steam,
to BioWare.
right?
After
Enough.
Cyberpunk, you'd think people
Right,
would, like, the
after
industry would learn
Cyberpunk,
after
right?
Cyberpunk.
You
Like,
would
that's
think there's been so many other precedents around this. You would think enough where Steam was even giving people back. Like they all. I don't know how they worked out the royalties with EA behind all of that, but
Yeah.
Steam was giving full refunds to people because of how broken a quote unquote finished game was. You know, so I think EA with this game, you know, needing to impress a certain generation of people that have played its games in the past, I think they really need to step up and make sure they know what they're doing with this and not push out something just to pocket an extra buck.
Honestly, that's one thing that I really wanted to dig into, because I've taken the time to look at the past few years, right, for EA and what they've done, right? Obviously, with Respawn under their belt, Respawn did great with Star Wars. What was the
Last
recent one
Jedi.
that came out? Fallen Order, right?
Fallen Order, yeah. Fallen
Right.
Order.
So honestly, that game, it was received very well. And honestly, when you think of the critic end of it, yeah, they gave it like an 8.5 out of 10. But if you look at the general consensus of the fans, we all loved it. We loved the abilities, we loved the skill tree, we loved the old Soulsborne type of atmosphere where if you die, you got to go back to where your checkpoint was, and you got to just try to make it to the next part of the level in one life. That was all loved and received very well. So that was very well executed. They did good there. Then you got Star Wars Squadrons, right? So you see a trend upward in terms of they've realized their mistakes, right? But one thing that I really love about them choosing to do this with Dead Space is because if they were to do it with a new IP or do it with Star Wars or do it with anything like that, they wouldn't have really catered to their original fans, right? So by original fans, I talk about the 360 era, and beyond, right? If you take the games that EA made in the 360 era, they were really great games. They were actually really effective games, right?
Yeah.
So they've alienated those fans with all these new games that they come out with, all the microtransactions.
Absolutely.
So for them to go back and say, we're going to tap into those original fans and we're going to make something for them to let them know that we're doing well. It's like, we're not going to take bullshit. Right? We're going to see right through anything that they do because we know what EA used to be and we know what EA can be. So for them to then take that leap of faith and say, all right, we're going to remake Dead Space. Honestly, it was probably one of the things that they should have remade years ago, and they should have never shuttered the doors of Visceral Games.
No, I'm glad they waited. I mean, they definitely shouldn't have shut down Visceral, but I'm glad they waited until today because like it's going to look so much better and be so much better with the modern technology we have now.
Very true. Very true. So it's like you look at it that way and you're like, okay, I'm confident that EA will not fuck this up because they know that they need to stay on their toes. If they mess up this game, then where do they go from here? There's really nowhere for them to go.
But think like how many
IPs, but then they pretty much messed up a studio that had genuine intentions of making a great game.
Oh, absolutely.
They would have messed them up.
But how are they going to? I mean, I don't really see that many ways in which they could mess it up that bad because, especially because like they're sticking, like they're remaking the game, but like they're not really messing with the story at all. I heard they're adding like maybe like in a few extra sequences, especially because I know they're bringing back what's the voice actor Garrett? I don't know, Gunnar Wright to voice.
They're bringing the original voice actor back.
Because in Dead Space 1 he didn't have any dialogue, but in 2 and 3 he did. So they're recording some dialogue for the Dead Space 1 remake with Gunnar Wright, which I imagine obviously there's no scenes of him speaking in the original, so they're gonna have to add some stuff in there for that.
Yeah, you're really remaking a lot of the scenes from the ground up. A lot of the cinematics.
but it's gonna be the same story, so I can't imagine as long as they just do justice to the story and it looks better, it's gonna be hard to mess it up. You know what I mean?
That's where you have to look at their history. So with Dead Space 3, that's what happened, right? They had
there was never any
multiplayer.
There was never really the online multiplayer to have
Yes,
microtransactions and loot,
and
really.
it caused the story to change, right? They had to add in that character that moved around with you every now and then, that they would then use as a co-op player. They would jump in, and because of the way that they originally wanted the story to be, they wanted it to be more survival horror. But because they weren't allowed to do that because EA wanted the microtransactions in the
More
game,
action oriented.
they needed to make it more action oriented. So then that literally changed what they said was the third act of the game. It literally changed it to be more of something where you needed to grind through and make sure you have all these cosmetics and things like that.
And you build
if
your
you
own
really wanted to
stuff.
pass and have a good time. So you just hope they don't do something small like that. Right? There's still confidence. They still did great things. You just hope they don't revert back to their old ways.
I do have confidence in Motiv Studio, right? Star Wars Squadron looked great. So them taking on this game, I'm not I think they were a good choice, like if there was a studio to remake a game and keep the same storyline but just kind of make it a little more immersive, a little more cinematic, have the experience with creating those animations, creating those cutscenes. I'm confident that Motiv is not going to send out something that we're going to be disappointed with.
Yeah, I agree.
So going around the table then, we'll start with you, Rocco. What's one thing from the original experience that sticks with you the most?
Well, I remember the first time I even played the game, this is way back, I used to get my demos on an Xbox 360 disc, and they used to be like, oh, the next 12 games that are coming out, like there'd be like one big game and then like 11 smaller games, and Dead Space was that game. I didn't really know much about it at the time, so when I just popped it in, it gave me some Doom vibes. I used to play Doom way back on the original Xbox, and those had the big jump scares, and that, maybe I was too young to play that at the time, but I was just like, those were the game I plugged it in once, and man. Like I was like, oh my gosh, like nope, too scary for me. So I got those vibes from it right away, and then as I kept playing with it, I found some sort of joy in the scares a little better than I did with Doom and Resident Evil. It's addicting, and you have a sense of control on it. It's like, oh, I have this guy coming after me, and it's like, I thought of it as like the Halo Flood, but more of a one-on-one, I'm gonna chop his limbs off and let him hurt for scaring me. It's just like, oh, you're gonna do that to me again. And there's that sense of joy, I guess. And then when there's more and more, you can line them up, and then you cut off all their limbs, and
get creative with it.
Get creative, and there's that satisfaction, right? It's like, yeah, I guess every level that you have with these, it is kind of like your own little artwork, and you're just like, oh, how am I gonna kill him this time?
With their own limbs, that's the best part.
I'm gonna chop off all their legs, and then just like watch them crawl towards me, and then I don't know, do a little teabag, run, do something. I don't know however you want to do it, but it was creative, and it took a scary game, and it still made it fun. Like it was still exhilarating. It still got your adrenaline going when they jumped out at you, but then you're just like, there's some sort of comic relief at some point when you just see something waddling along because it doesn't have legs because you chopped them off.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brandon. Go ahead, be damned.
Probably, I don't know, like specific moment. Are we doing just Dead Space 1 or the whole series? Because like I would say like one of my favorite ever video game sequences in general has to be the Dead Space 2 Halo jump. If you guys remember what I'm talking about, that scene where like you're like trying to get back down to, you're like up in a spaceship or whatever, you got to get back down to the like the ground on the space station, and like you're strapped into this giant thing, and like it's this whole sequence where like you're like, oh, I've got to get down there, and you like strap into this thing, and like it like rockets you out of there, and then you just like Halo jump, and it's like dead quiet, and you're like, you have like rocket like jets on your legs that just like ignite, and it's just like super cinematic and super epic. And like I remember that scene specifically. And then like it goes from like that sequence, and also the sequence when you like also like when you're fighting that giant lizard thing at the church, and you wind up like going into space and like fighting it on that satellite again. Like you remember like just like things like that. Like there's so many scenes, or even like Dead Space 1, where the first time you're in the hallway and that giant like arm like thing comes and grabs you.
Arm comes after you. Yep.
And you keep hallucinating it in the second game. When you're like going through the marker, like brain disease or whatever.
Fun fact about that tentacle arm. That tentacle arm was nearly the death of the first game. I remember almost had to give up making the game because they were stuck on that tentacle arm and how to animate it and what the sequence was going to look like, passing yourself to the hallways. Then on top of that, animating it, holding you, and you still being able to shoot at it. Then on top of that, animating it, holding you, and you still being able to shoot at it, and what direction they stayed on that for a very long time in development. It almost had them can the game, but they eventually made it through, and I'm happy they did because it's one of the best sequences of all time, and that's the one that I'm stuck with. It's that first time you walk in that hallway. You haven't really seen. I mean, I guess you could go with Uncharted in terms of sequences like that, where there's a lot of player involvement in terms of the character, interacting with a lot of the environment, and all these different angles and smooth animations. Really, Uncharted was the only game that was really doing that at that time, and Naughty Dog, right?
Yeah.
So to see this happening like in a horror game, you'd never seen it before. Resident Evil hadn't done it. Resident Evil was very stiff in their movement.
That sort of cinematic.
And even this game was still stiff, right? But to have this kind of a sequence in there, it just added to the whole aspect of like, yo, what is around the other corner? Like when you saw that, you're like, okay, if they're gonna throw this at me, what's next, right? That's how great the game was and how scary it was. So it's a great list of things to have to look forward to in the game coming up. I'd say it come out maybe late 2022. Early
I think
2023, right?
I think it's expected I think right now they have it listed expected Q4 2022, but who knows? It could come out Q1 2023, like easily.
I think if EA has learned anything, especially after last year's or this year's Battlefield release, it was so ridiculous that I thought it was last year. I think they're gonna start planning ahead on their future portfolio of games and really kind of consider what does this need extra time and not make the same mistakes they've made in the past. So I'm hoping that it's sometime halfway through 2023 or later.
You already got the graphics taken care of. That's the easy part. Now you get to work on the actual gameplay and what they're going to involve, right? So that's the next thing we're going to go into is what are some of the changes they're going to have gameplay wise in this remake? Because for me, a lot of the problem was the movement. It was very clunky. And apparently they're going to be adding the movement from the next two games in it, right? Now, that brings up a question. We've seen with these games, these ambitious games that have come out recently, we've seen how they've performed on the consoles as opposed to PC, right?
Yeah.
There's a huge disappointment with Dying Light 2 that just came out in terms of the performance that it had on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, as opposed to obviously what a PC could handle. There shouldn't be a reason why 1080p gaming exists on this generation, right? So how confident are we that they're going to cater to those editions of the game? Because Cyberpunk had a problem with it.
Yeah,
Dying Light has had a problem with it.
A lot of the newer
games have.
Well, actually no. Well, I mean, actually no, you're right. But I've also heard like the reverse also. Like Elden Ring just released and was having working fine on console, but is having terrible frame rate issues on PC. So I've seen the reverse also. And I mean, I hope
made that more graphically intensive, right? So I guess maybe it's about the studio behind the game. In terms of how they implement
it depends on what they optimize the game for, because like games are optimized, I think, for console or for PC, really, depending on where they think most of their market's going to be coming from.
Well, I think when you bring up Elden Ring, that's a good example, right? Because that really brings in the mechanics of the game and whether the frames really matter when you port them either from a console to a PC, right? Usually PC, you have your unlocked frames. If you have a 144, great. If you have a 320 hertz frame, even better, right? But you have to remember that gives you an advantage in the game. And that also is how many different reads and writes are going on and how many inputs are being read during that frame at that time. A game like Elden Ring, they capped that at 60 frames per second, whether you're on a console or you're on a PC. And this is 2022, right? 60 frames, we want to be able to at least unlock our frames, do whatever. But the reason for that is actually because of the mechanics of the game, right? There's those iframes, those invincible frames that, you roll dodge and you can get past, but it's because it's a frame in the game, and that's how you actually play through the mechanic. Now, if Dead Space decides to take that same route, Dead Space has similar, I'm not saying it's any Elden Ring or any Dark Souls type of game, but it does kind of have combat where it's just like you need to time things correctly in order for you to actually accomplish or get by this thing.
Exactly. So there's a lot of potential here for a great game, and there's a lot of potential for them to really just catapult off of this. And I don't even want to think about Dead Space 2 right now because a lot of people agree on the fact that, yeah, Dead Space was scary, but in a way, Dead Space 2 had its moments of being way scarier and way more intense just because of the updated graphics and the updated movements and, you know, a couple extra action scenes, like you said, Brendan, when you're out in the zero-G environment and you're trying to get back down to the space station. Like, there's just so much more they were able to do with it. I hope that they give us a good balance of change and a good balance of, you know, keeping things the way they were. And then that happens, I don't see a problem with EA. And I think Motiv's going to kill it with this game. If you're hearing this, EA, keep your eye on the ball.
And we know you are listening, EA.
According to Brendan, bro, don't even go don't even go a step off for the first game. Just redo it, update the graphics, and give it to us now and take my money. And then, you know, we'll be happy and you guys can move on to
but not my microtransaction money.
So, all right. So that's it for episode 4 of Filmic Gaming Podcast. Again, if you guys aren't familiar with the channel, we're a cinematic gaming channel who, you know, we try to take the narratives of all the best games, past and present, and we really just put our own spin on it, put some cinematic edits together and make them like little mini movies, and we put them up. And now we also have this new podcast where we're going to be, you know, contextualizing things in video form for you guys, and we're also going to be available on Spotify and YouTube. So thank you guys for listening in, and we hope to see you guys next time. And for right now, Brendan, say peace out to the people.
Peace out.
Every week it's something different, it's something special. Every week. Rocco, you don't got a lot to live up to because that's all he really says.
Deuces holla breezy.
Oh. All right, I think that's with that. I'm gonna cut it right there. Peace out, people.
Even before they cracked the planet, the colonists were experiencing widespread dementia. It seems to be related to some artifact they found on the planet, something called the marker. I'll keep looking.